All right, we are going to try to read chapter 1 here of History Smashers. We couldn't find the read aloud anywhere on YouTube, so I'm going to do it. The book you started yesterday in class was called History Smashers, and here's the cover. And it's all about the Mayflower. Author is Kate Messner, and illustrations are done by Dylan McConis. So here we have the table of contents. We're going to read chapter 1 right now. Chapter 1, Who Were the Pilgrims Anyways? Starts on page 3, and on page 24, chapter 2 will start. So this is a bit of a graphic novel, so you'll see not just text, but pictures in it also. You've probably heard about the Mayflower. Chances are someone told you about the Pilgrims who came to America because they wanted religious freedom. You probably learned how they crossed the wild Atlantic, how they landed at Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts, and how the Wampanoag people taught them how to grow corn, and how they all celebrated by sitting down together for a feast, the very first Thanksgiving. But only parts of that story are true. There's a lot more history to the Mayflower, the Pilgrims, and the Wampanoag. So let's take a look at the historical documents, smash some of those old myths, and uncover the real story. Page 3. Chapter 1, Who were the Pilgrims anyway? If April showers bring May flowers, what do May flowers bring? The answer to the riddle, of course, is pilgrims. The joke works because almost everyone knows a little about the Pilgrims. We've heard how they left England and came to America in search of religious freedom. But that's not even close to the whole story. For starters, the Pilgrims did not go to America when they left England, not at first anyway. The real deal story of the Mayflower begins way back in the 1530s when King Henry VIII made some big changes to religion in England. King Henry wanted a son who would grow up to be the King of England too. He and his first wife only had a daughter though. Henry decided the solution was to get divorced and marry someone else with whom he might have a son. Page 5. But the Roman Catholic Church was the official church in England then, and it did not allow divorce. King Henry went all the way to the Pope, the leader of the whole Catholic Church, to argue that he should be able to leave his wife and marry a new one. When the Pope said no, Henry decided to break away from the Catholic Church and start his own. From then on, the Church of England would be the official church of the land. King Henry wasn't the only one who had issues with the Roman Catholic Church at that time. Many people complained that Catholic leaders had too much power and wealth. But not everyone liked King Henry's new church either. Some thought it was too similar to the Catholic Church. One group, called the Puritans, wanted the new church to be purified of all the old practices. Other people didn't think that that was enough. They were called separatists because they wanted to separate from the Church of England completely and have their own religion. The separatists thought that true Christian believers should come together in their own small churches. They wanted those churches to be independent so members could study the Bible and make decisions on their own. William Brewster, who was the postmaster of the village called Scrooby, decided to start a church in his own house. It was a risky idea. Back then, the people who didn't follow the Church of England could be thrown in jail. In his book of Plymouth Plantation, Pilgrim William Bradford wrote that Brewster's separatists were hunted and persecuted on every side. And here's a little picture. I'm assuming it's Brewster's separatists being persecuted. Or maybe they're kind of sneaking into the house to have their church service. Government officials were watching the separatist houses day and night. Some of them did get thrown into jail. You probably understand why leaving England was starting to seem like a good idea. So that's when the separatists set sail for America, right? Wrong. They went to Holland. Page 7. And here's a little map. As they're starting here in England at Scrooby, and they go across here to Amsterdam, which is in Holland. Holland, which today we call the Netherlands, was known for their religious freedom. Brewster learned that a small group of separatists had recently escaped to the city of Amsterdam, where they could practice their religion in peace. That seemed like a good idea, so Brewster made plans to take his group there too. His followers were nervous, though. They didn't speak Dutch, which is the language they speak there. They weren't sure how they'd earn money to support their families. Bradford later wrote that to many of the separatists, taking off for Holland seemed like an adventure almost desperate and a misery worse than death. but after much discussion, they decided to go anyway. And on this page, we have a little comic. So it says 1607, which is the year. Brewster arranged for a ship to sneak his congregation away to Amsterdam. It was expensive, and they had to wait a long time, but he didn't see any other option. So that must be Brewster here. The day finally arrived. It was time for the separatists to leave England once and for all. But then everything fell apart. The ship's captain had ratted them out. The ship's crew ransacked all of the passengers' belongings, looking for money. And they returned the separatists over to the authorities. Instead of escaping to Holland, they ended up spending a month in English prison. Page 9. But Brewster didn't give up. About a year later, he took his group north in England and found another ship. Officials discovered their plan and tried to catch them again, but this time the separatists saw the authorities coming. Most of the men had boarded the ship, and in a panic, they brought up the anchor, hoisted the sails, and took off. The women and children who hadn't boarded yet were still waiting on the dock with most of their belongings. The English authorities caught the women and children, but then they weren't quite sure what to do with them, since their husbands and fathers were gone. Page 10. Eventually, the women and children were released and met up with the others in Holland. This group of separatists lived in Amsterdam for about a year before deciding that the busy port city wasn't the right place for them. It was time to move on. So that's when they left for Plymouth Rock, right? Nope. Instead, they moved to another city in Holland called Leiden. Or it might be pronounced Leiden, I'm not sure. Leiden was a beautiful city with a university. It was also known for cloth making, and some of the newly arrived separatists got jobs in that industry. They worked long hours at looms to weave linen and wool cloth. They would bring their products to the town chapel where members of the local Weavers' Guild would examine them. If the cloth was judged to be of high enough quality, then it could be sold. Leiden was also home to a towering 12th century castle whose grounds had been turned into a public park. When Bradford and the other separatists weren't working, they spent time there with their families. Sounds pretty nice, doesn't it? But the separatists weren't very happy in Leiden either. The language sounded strange to them, and they weren't used to the Dutch customs. I think I'm going to stop the video here so it doesn't get too big, and then upload part 2.